If you have been feeling lost, my guest today is going to teach us how to use our inner wisdom as we navigate through change and uncertainty and embrace our radical acceptance to meet life where it is. Dr. Breese Annable is a seasoned clinical psychologist with over 15 years' experience in empowering individuals to build meaningful lives. Welcome to the show, Breese.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, the first question I want to ask you is something that I grapple with myself because I am approaching those years of, working less hours in my day job and maybe transitioning into retirement, whatever that work looks like. But this question that keeps, hitting me is what am I going to do for the rest of my life? So, can you help us understand why this gives us so much anxiety?
Well, I will say you don't have to look far. I mean, just even, posing the question, I think we can look at it in a couple of ways. So first, just even again, the visceral experience of of the question, the rest of my life. Oh my God, right? Like even just thinking that, I think it's completely normal and understandable to have a sense of pressure. Like it implies that there is something that you've got to get right, for this really long period of time. And so, I mean, I think it's totally natural to have a sense of anxiety and stress around that. It's just such a big, heavy question. So again, I mean, I think that it's normal to land in that way. And again, I think so. It's looking at twofold. It's the experience of it. Well, that makes sense. Such a big, heavy question, but it's also the underlying premise of it. Well, the underlying premise of that question is that you only get to choose once, and you have to pick something. And so I think that's an important thing to start with is to really understand the underlying premise that that question is coming from, and then I think really challenge that underlying premise altogether.
That is so interesting. I never would have thought of it that way, but it makes so much sense. And as you're talking, I was circling back to a discussion I had with my son who was coming out of high school like 5 or 6 years ago. And now that I think about it, it was probably the same fear or anxiety that
Yeah.
he was experiencing because we actually had to pull him back and say, okay, instead of thinking for the rest of your life, what do you want to do for the next 5 years? And then you could see his
Yeah.
shoulders just drop and go,
Yes.
oh, well, when
Yes.
you put it that way,
Yes.
um, so a
Yes.
lot of similarities there, and we don't have to pick one.
Exactly. I don't know if this is necessarily the case, but I think there is maybe truth to that being a generational question too. I think those of us who are in midlife, quote unquote, 40s and older, I think we were raised in generations where, our parents and our grandparents, it was common to pick a career and you stayed with it. I mean, both my parents picked a career and they retired in that same career. There were, different pivots within that over the years, but for the most part, same career. And so I think that is the modeling that so many of us have, is that you pick this thing and it's what you do. I think a really cool thing is that, or people who are younger now, that's not really the norm anymore. And I think, pros and cons to everything, of course, but I think a really wonderful part of that is that it allows for exactly what we were just talking about, this perspective where we get to evolve, we get to change, and we should evolve and we should change. And gosh, there's so much we could talk about there, but just to touch on what you observed with your son, oh, his shoulders drop. You can just see the relief that comes with that. And the really cool thing about that is that it feels better and it works better, because when we're in that state, we're like, whew, our shoulders drop. I'm breathing a little deeper. Our minds then can open up. We can have a more creative, expansive, imaginative state of mind. And so, what's better? Feels better, works better.
And I think that segues perfectly into my next question for you. And it's this
Mhm.
whole idea around fear. Because,
Yeah.
and I think I'm going to answer this myself. If I'm connecting the dots correctly, if we don't have to choose just one, which also to me means there's no wrong answer, that
Yes.
kind of alleviates the fear of maybe choosing
Yes.
the wrong thing. So we can become
Yes.
unfrozen and we can step confidently in the general direction that we might want to go.
Yes. I love even just how the tone in that last part of what you said, like the general direction that we might go. Like there's a lightheartedness to that. It's just like we get to try things. We get to experiment. We get to, just have this relationship with our lives and work where we get to try things. And it doesn't have to be this pressure and this, again, this fear based, like, I've got to figure it out. So, the mindset that you were talking about, just I could hear it in the tone, of just like we get to create and we get to imagine and we get to experiment with different options and different paths. And there truly there's no right answer for any of us, and there's no one answer, I guess I should say, for any of us.
Would this be different if you had someone who perhaps was just on the precipice of graduating into retirement versus the person who, they're getting, like you say, let's say 40 plus, somewhere in there. They're not quite ready financially to retire, but they
Hmm.
want to shift careers for one reason or another. Do you think
Yeah.
there's the fear of lost income or other fears that people are facing?
Absolutely. While I talk so much about creativity and imagination and all of these things, I'm also a realist. We have bills to pay, we have mortgages, we have kids' college, or all of these different things. So there are absolutely realities of life that we have to take into account. And so it's this, I think, balance between the mindset and seeing things in the way that we were just talking about with those practical realities. And I think it's very individual, right? There could be somebody in their 40s who has made a lot of money at that point in their career, and so they might have a lot of options. You have somebody in retirement who doesn't have a big retirement, and so I think there are just so many variables that come into play there. But what I like to think about is that a lot of times, if we start with those realities, quote unquote, finances and those sorts of things, it has a way of locking us up and moving us into that fear state. And so it's not about ignoring them or being, Pollyanna about things. But I think it's important not to lead with that so much that, again, it feels like it stifles the possibilities that we can imagine. Because again, I think in that process, certainly there's time there of saying, okay, and what's the financial feasibility of
Mm.
this? But even that can have creativity with that. We can look at our finances and income and all of these different things in creative new ways. So I think that mindset absolutely still applies.
So the next question I have for you then is how can we switch our mindset? Because, like you say, I think the generation that we're speaking of, we have typically been raised in households where things are a lot more concrete, right?
Mhm.
This whimsical, and I shouldn't even use that word because it sounds like it's a little bit, woo woo, but
Yeah.
the flexibility, let's call it that, maybe that,
Yeah.
even when 5 years ago, I told my dad I was going to write a book. Well, why would you do that? How's that going to help you? What is that going to put some money in the bank?
Right.
Well, no, actually, Dad, it's going to cost me a lot of money to write it, but and just could
Right.
not understand. Or,
Mhm.
I have worked as a radiation therapist at the cancer clinic here where I live for 33 years. But
Yeah.
in the last 15 years, I have worked part time so that I
Yeah.
could create these other areas of career, that
Yeah.
followed maybe my heart a little bit more. But
Yeah.
even that, my dad was like, "Well, why are you doing that? You know, got a good
Right.
job. You could work there full time and make more money." And
Right.
of course, I know that my thinking doesn't always have to follow other people's thinking, but he's
Mhm.
my dad and I respect him. So it does stop me in my tracks. And I do think,
Yeah.
oh, well, yeah, so then
Right.
but how can we, I guess, switch our mindset to one that's more flexible and resilient at
Yeah.
the same time?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I think the first step is to really be curious about, well, what are those beliefs that I'm holding, to start with? Because we're all walking around with those beliefs, but we don't always have words around them. We haven't always articulated them. But of course, then our decisions and our thoughts and our actions are still, driven by them. But so I think that's the first thing, is to really step back and get clear about, well, what are those beliefs that might be, for example, making me think, well, I have to stay at this same job for 30 years full time. That's because, again, so often we have these beliefs that we just take to be true, and we operate as if it's true rather than only one way or only one option. So I think that's the first, is to really get clear about, well, what am I believing and saying to myself, again, even if it's not consciously or with words yet, but what are my actions or my assumptions, or the limitations that I'm putting on myself conveying? So I think that's the first thing. And then I always say the cool thing about being an adult is that we get to change our minds. And we get to step back and go, well, is that really true to me, who I am, the kind of life I want to live? Because sure, a lot of times those beliefs have just been, we've inherited them. Again, consciously or unconsciously, it's whether it's what we've observed, or what people in our lives have said. So recognizing, like, you do get to choose, that those beliefs are there, and you get to choose others. I will say, though, that when I talk about beliefs, I absolutely recognize beliefs can take a really long time to change. And so the way that I think about it is, like, we don't have to wait around to believe something differently to start doing something differently. So I think that's the third piece, then, is to start to practice. If, let's imagine, you say to yourself, well, gosh, like your son, for example, his shoulders dropped when you said, what if you only think about the next 5 years or the next year? There was something in that, like, his body immediately said yes to, you know and so if you really do uh, some thought and some awareness for yourself around that, and you realize, well, maybe I hold different values, and maybe, and again, it's really paying attention to, like, how does that viscerally feel when I think about the permission to change and evolve. um, and so then I think the next piece is practice that new way of being. And again, I like the idea of practice because it is just that. We don't have to be good at it. We're not going to be good at it at first. It's just like, how can I practice seeing, for example, more opportunities or possibilities for myself than I might have seen before? Um, and so that would be the next piece is I think look for ways of practicing and doing it differently before you believe something fully differently yet.
So good. So many good little nuggets in there. Do you think that we come at this massive decision, although we've said now that it's not massive?
Yeah.
Do we think we come at this sometimes from a place of lack?
Yeah. Well, I think lack and and constriction. And when I say constriction, I mean I don't know if this is what how you're thinking about lack, but I think this idea of, you know, there are only so many options that I can choose from, or I only can do these things. Um, at that, or, oh, well, somebody else is already doing that. Or, who am I to go do that? It's already being done. Or, I think there are lots of ways that we can interpret lack, but absolutely any iteration of those thoughts, absolutely, it will shut us down and very often just create that paralysis and indecision and self doubt, all of those things.
The question I'm thinking now is something that I use in my coaching practice, and that is simply what if?
Yes. Yeah.
Because when we
Yeah.
throw that out into a conversation or to ourselves and
Yeah.
just what if dot dot dot,
Yes.
what if it all works out?
Exactly.
What if I love
Oh,
this? What if it makes
yes.
me happier than ever?
Yes.
But even
I
if you go
love that
down the
question.
other path of what if it doesn't work out? Well, then I come back to this spot here and we choose another path.
Yes. Well, I would even say, well, first off, let me say, I love the question, what if? Because again, that is a perfect way of practicing um, flexible thinking and open mindedness and seeing these possibilities. I also love it. I actually used to have on my phone the wallpaper was, what if it all works out?
Mm.
And I had that, and I'm not a somebody who automatically goes to worst case scenario, but there's just something about being human that is just where our minds tend to go, especially in times of uncharted territory, you know. And I can tell you, in almost 20 years as a psychologist, I've never had anybody come and say, I'm so worried about all these wonderful possibilities that could happen. It's our mind always goes to just these narrow possibilities of fear and does not allow us to envision, imagine, play around with, well, what if it works out? So I'll just say I absolutely love that question because again, it opens us up.
For sure. So let's dive into maybe some concrete ways that our listeners can help, maybe some exercises or some questions they can ask themselves so that they can identify their own skills, their interests, their values, rather than, like, for myself, I've worked as a radiation therapist. You talk about a niche, narrow area of practice within healthcare.
Yeah.
And part of
Yeah.
the reason I've been there for so long is because I am so specially trained that it's really hard to pivot out of that field without recreating myself, which is kind of what I've had to do. But if people
Yeah.
are at that point in their lives when they want more, they want to pivot, they want to go part-time with the full-time job, they want maybe to create a consulting job or something like that for retirement, how can we
Yeah.
identify and highlight these things to help us choose a path?
Yes. Well, I think one of the first things as far as skills, so I a lot of times use, skills and talents kind of interchangeably. And so I think we can look at this in a couple of ways. So Skills, I mean, certainly we can have skills that we have acquired in a certain field, right? So what kind of tasks or jobs do I do well? There's also that idea of what are the things that also just come easily, come naturally to me. And and I think we all have those things that it just comes easily, and so we assume it comes easily for other people. Um, but usually it doesn't, it's like, and so recognizing if it comes easily to you, that is unique. And it doesn't mean nobody else has that skill, but everyone else doesn't also have it either. So I think that can be a really good question, or like, what are the things that come easily, naturally to me? Um, I think it's also been, I don't know, I just keep coming back to this idea of really having fresh eyes though around these skills, because I had such a similar experience for myself when I came to a place of knowing that I needed to be doing something different in my career, but I'd been so specialized. I had decided, my entire career that I was going to be a specialist. I intentionally chose that early in my career. And so that is one of the things that paralyzed me. For quite some time, I kept saying to myself, "Oh, I'm a one-trick pony. I only know this one field, this one thing." And what was so important for me was to get, number one, really clear about what those skills were, but then to recognize if I can look at that with fresh eyes, those skills with fresh eyes, I can see how they can really transfer to so many other different things. Like, for example, as a psychologist, okay, well, I can talk to people pretty well. Um, and I can really listen to people. And, that is a skill. It comes naturally, but it also came from a whole lot of practice. And then starting to think, well, there are lots of things that I can do where I'm connecting to people, and it's a people focused career. So to answer your question again, it's that thinking about what comes easily, what comes naturally, even like what have I learned that I'm good at, but also I think it's so important to recognize some other pieces there too, that we can certainly talk about. But again, to then be able to think flexibly, and to really recognize that so many skills can transfer in other ways that don't have to just be this one box that we've been in.
Absolutely, especially when we think high level with our skills or talents, as you say, you know, and
Yeah.
honestly, talking to people and listening. I mean, we think we can all do it
Yeah,
because we all have a mouth and we all have ears, but very few people are really good at it. So to have a talent like that
exactly.
is a special
Exactly.
thing.
Yes, absolutely. Even, I don't know a ton about being, in radiology, but for example, if you're somebody who's interacting with patients, for some people, they may say, like, that's the part that I love about the job. Like having, even if it's a brief time, I get to set people's mind at ease. I get to help an anxious experience maybe feel a little easier for them. And so that's another piece that I would really emphasize is to pay attention to the aspects of your job now or even in the past where there was this like engagement or excitement. It's really kind of fine tuning. What is it about what I do that excites me, that I feel engaged? So it's really unpacking the work that maybe you do now, because it's rarely people say like, I don't like any of it.
Right.
Very often it's really again putting our finger on like, well, what are the specifics?
100%.
Where do I feel engaged? Where do I feel connected?
As you were talking there, I was just thinking about my career as a radiation therapist, and I'm currently working 1 day a week doing that. But definitely connecting with my patients and their families. That's one
Yes.
thing. We are, all of us, every single one of us in that department, we're all type A, very, very, very detail oriented. We have to be. I mean, we
Yes.
treat to the millimeter. Like there's no good enough in radiation
Right.
therapy.
Right.
I love and thrive on organization, getting things done, like striking
Yes.
things off a list brings me so much
Yes.
joy. I probably
Yes.
need
I can
therapy
see it in
around
your
that, but it
body.
brings me joy.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
so even when I think beyond my coaching business,
Yes.
one of my daughter's friends recently said to me, she's a nurse and she works in pediatrics. And I said, I would really like to explore some volunteering options. And she looked at me and she said, we could really use baby cuddlers in the NICU.
Uh,
And I thought, oh my gosh, where do I sign up? Here's a
yes.
way to be actually inside the hospital,
Yes.
but
Yes.
not being the person running around like a crazy person doing the work, but being the nurturer. And
Yes.
my heart kind of melted a little bit. And I just thought, somebody sent me that message on purpose today. I needed to
Uh,
hear it. But it parlays. You're right. When we can kind of peel that onion back, if you will, almost like our resume, take out the
yes.
resume or think about the things that you love that light you up. Is it the people at
Yes.
work?
Yes.
Oftentimes it is the people at work. So where could
Yes.
you find something like that that's either a volunteer thing? Maybe you want to volunteer
Right.
for the school barbecue or anything,
Yes.
but take
Yes.
those skills and those talents that you love and
Yes.
think broad.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I want to highlight from what you were just saying, two things. Number one, I saw equal excitement with crossing things off of a list and that very type A organized. I've got this, I've got a lot of that too, so I totally relate. But that very analytical, organized, down to the millimeter precision, that's a very particular not only skill set, but I literally saw you light up when you just imagined, crossing something off of a list. But then you equally had a visceral emotional response to cuddling babies, which is a completely different. There's I struggle to see any analysis, or type A. That is just such a visceral emotional experience. And so I think that's such a perfect example of like all of that lives within you. There's such a multitude of aspects of who you are and what you could explore that that there was just so much there that again equally felt true to you for who you are. And so I think that's so important to really recognize that we don't, again, it comes back to that idea of like you don't have to pick one thing because we're not these one-dimensional beings. We're multifaceted. There's so much to who we are, and so there's so many different parts of ourselves that we can explore. And I love the idea from Designing Your Life, where they say we have so many lives to live within our life.
Mm.
This idea of like there's so many parts of ourselves that we get
Mm.
to try out and try on and explore. So that just I think was just such a perfect example of how like we're not one dimensional. We shouldn't have to just pick one thing, but like, and we can do it in this really imaginative way of like, yeah, maybe I'm still working in radiology one day a week, and then I'm cuddling babies, and then I'm writing a book. Like we get to really imagine this way of designing our lives that it just can reflect so many aspects of who we are.
Absolutely. And I think I would probably drive myself bananas if I only chose things that were analytical, type A, all organization, all involved, striking things off a list. How boring would that be? So
Right.
my heart is looking for things that are outside of that realm
Yes.
to
Yes.
just, help me, I guess, be a more well-rounded person, or even to fulfill things that I'm not even aware that I need,
Yes.
but that
Yes.
my spirit wants, I guess, is the best way I can
Yes.
put it.
Yes. Well, and I think that is, such a great way of thinking about it too, because I think a lot of times when we think about, well, how do I identify my skills? And how do I identify, what I'm good at? And, it can feel really hard to define those things. And again, it's not to say that that can't be really important. I think absolutely. And sometimes we need to talk to other people to get their perspective and, just start to maybe get some outside eyes. But I also think that it's so important just to pay attention to the visceral experience that you
Hmm.
have. Like when
Hmm.
you were saying my spirit says, yeah, paraphrasing, like my spirit says yes
Yeah.
to this, because not everybody says yes to cuddling babies. Like there's something
Mhm.
in you that says, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's just like it's right there, and I
Our gut
think it's so
knows.
much. Yes, exactly, exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about the work you do with women, helping them transition career wise and so on. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so I have a group coaching program, and it is um, only for women in midlife. And again, I define midlife as 40 plus. And really, I do that work because I had my own personal experience with midlife career transition, and my goodness, I fumbled through in so many ways, despite, being a psychologist and knowing so many tools and skills for transitions. It was a really challenging one for me. And I came through that and on the other side and just felt like there was so much that I learned from it and continuing to learn. I hope I always will and will continue to. But one of the things that I became so clear about is again what big part of what we have been talking about, that I think women in midlife we need to be told and taught that we not only get to evolve, but we need to evolve. Um, Even I hesitate to say given permission, because I don't think we need to be given permission, but we need to be
We do.
told to be, we need to be told that is even a possibility, because truly for me, it was not even a thought in my mind until I had that experience. And so I've just become so passionate about that piece of things, about just spreading it far and wide to women in midlife of like, you not only get to, but we need to continue to evolve throughout our entire lives. And then the other piece is the importance of community, because and we've touched on it in this conversation, the fear that comes up, the uncertainty that comes up, the experience of, I talk to so many women who say, like, I've always done the safe thing. I've
Mm,
always done what was expected
yep.
of me. And then to even have the idea of starting to do things differently, pursue something, out of the box or in a very different direction, is going to be hard either way, but it is that much harder when we do it in isolation. And
Hmm.
so I'm just such a big believer in community and the leverage that we can get in community, seeing other women, take bold, courageous leaps or even pivots that still require courage. It's just, it's infectious. It gives us the leverage a lot of times to be able to do those same things in our own lives. So, yes. So, to answer your question, I have a group coaching program for women, really, again, around that midlife career transition. It's a combination of tools and skills, but then it's also community, which I just think is so, so needed.
I agree. I agree with everything that you just said. And I love the fact that you have the background as a psychologist. Like you get how we think and, the beliefs and, you can pull us back and all that kind of thing. So I think if
Yeah.
anybody is looking to make a career change or a pivot and wants the help to do that, but also the help with the psychological end of things, go and check out Breese, everyone. Breese, can you tell us where the best place is for people to find you?
Yes. So the best place is my website, which is drbreeseannable.com. I also have a Facebook page, which is a community for women called the Brave New Beginnings Collective. It's got free content and a way of starting to find community there. I'm also on social media on Instagram, but those are some good places to find me.
Fantastic. I know some of our listeners will be checking that out for sure. Brees, it has literally been like a breath of fresh air to talk to you. I just took so
Thank
many
you.
things away from that, even with my own journey, where I'm at, the pivots, the changes, what's coming up next, and all of that, and
Yeah.
lots of new and fresh ways to think about it. So I appreciate that very
Oh,
much. Thank you so much for being here today.
oh, thank you so much for having me. It was such a joy.
And to the listeners, as always, be well and stay resilient, and we'll catch you next time.